Morning. Bonnie, are you there?
Hi, good morning, Perry. Yes, I am here.
Great.
Good morning,
Uh,
almost noon.
Morning almost soon. Hello everyone. This is Perry Scholes. I'm the president and founder of um, CPG Professional Networks and Kraft Foods Alumni Network. Um, I have embedded into the webinar today a polling system that allows us to get your opinion. And so just as a test of the system, this is the first slide. It's sort of a tester. So if your cell phone is near you, you can go, or your computer, you can go to pollev.com/Perry Scholes 398 to participate, or on your cell phone, dial 22333, which is at the top of your phone where you would put a phone number, put 22333. On the bottom where you would text Perry Scholes 398, hit send. Once you hit send, you will get a text message back that says you've entered into Perry Scholes' poll, and then you're able to type in your answer to this first sort of test poll, which is, what did you do on Super Bowl Sunday? So if you have an opportunity, again, participate in the poll. This is really just a test so that we can make sure that as we get into the webinar, the polling system is working. If you'd love to participate. Okay, if you just joined us, you've joined the Train Your Brain to be a better listener. We're doing a poll throughout the presentation, and so we're asking participants to use your cell phone or your computer to participate in the poll that you see on your screen. So your phone number is 22333. You would text Perry Scholes 398, hit send, you'll get entered into the poll, and then you can type in your response to the poll you see on your screen. And as you submit information, you should be able to see it pop up on the screen. All right. Hello. If you just joined us, you have joined the Train Your Brain to be a Better Listener webinar. And what you see on the screen is a poll. We're going to do some polling throughout the webinar. And so we're just giving everyone an opportunity to participate. This is sort of a test poll to see that everyone is connected. All right, so I'm going to move on from this poll. You'll have an opportunity to send in your participation for the next poll that's coming up. I love it, took a nap. All right. So welcome everyone. Again, my name is Perry Scholes. I'm the president of CPG Professional Networks and a co-founder of Kraft Foods Alumni Network and the Bisco Alumni Network, and a number of the alumni groups that you see on the screen. This is our website. I wanted to just take a few seconds to walk you through the community that we're building online and through networking. So we have 4 key areas that we're focused on in this global community. That's networking, talent, consultancy, subject matter experts in development. And those of you familiar with working in the CPG industry, most of the larger CPG companies had a rich history of developing talent and developing their people and having rich networks. And so CPG Professional Network and all of its alumni groups are steeped in that same sort of foundation. One of the things that you'll see on the websites that we've developed under each of those 4 key areas, for example, what just flashed here is talent. We have a job board, we have career resources, and we have a network of career transition practitioners. And this is really laid out for anyone who is at any point in time in their career maybe going through a career transition. And so these resources are available online and will continue to be growing. The next area is development. For those of you who are in companies, small or large or what have you, looking for help with your professional growth, whether you want to bring in an OD professional to help you with some of the things that you may be doing with your team, or if you are a professional who's looking for some executive coaching, we do have a directory of coaches that are all very familiar with the CPG industry and the things that go on in a variety, working in a variety of functions. And then you also see under development, there's a link for webinars. You go into this area for webinars, you will, within a short period of time after this webinar, see this webinar listed, and you will also see webinars that we recorded last year that some of our members participated in as producers, like Bonnie Metzger is today. And then the other piece that you'll find on our network is the groups and the networking opportunities for different communities. There are chapters. Right now we have 5 chapters that are in some form of development. Chicago, Latin America, and Metro New York are the most developed chapters, with Atlanta, Madison, Wisconsin, all on the books to sort of continue to grow in their evolution. But those are geographic groups where there's a concentration of CPG professionals that get together for local events, sharing job opportunities, supporting each other through career transitions, and mentoring and teaching others. So the sorry about that. The other area is our alumni groups. So we have within the web property right now 5 different alumni groups, a 6th coming on pretty soon. Sarah Lee is joining the network group. But we have these alumni communities that you can join in. Those communities will have in itself some specific networking events and opportunities. There'll be blogs where you're following previous company leaders, quarterly newsletters, job postings that are specific to some of those networks will also exist, and each one of them have a member directory. So if you are a member and you haven't joined these groups and you belong to one of these alumni groups, you should go in, update your profile so that you can show up on the directory, so that as other members join that alumni group, they can find you and you become a part of that community. So today we're here for the webinar series called Train Your Brain to Be a Better Listener. Bonnie Metzger is our facilitator for this content, and she is a alum of Kraft Foods, and this is her 2nd webinar. So in the recorded webinar section, you'll see another webinar that Bonnie facilitated, and I am now going to turn it over to Bonnie to take you through Train Your Brain to Be a Better Listener. Bonnie?
Hi, thanks, Perry. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And first, Perry, I just want to thank you for all of your efforts in putting not only the website together, but getting the chapters active. It's just been a tireless many years you've done that, and just hats off to you for all of that work that you've been doing. Thank you. So as Perry said, I'm Bonnie, and I was with Kraft about 22 years. And then after that, I actually had a chance to join the aerospace industry. So that was a very neat, eye-opening experience. But all of that time, actually for over 20 years, I have been focusing on development work of leaders, teams, individuals, organizations, you name it. Lots of development, and I love it. I do serve as a one-on-one coach for all levels of leaders. And one thing that seems to be a common theme across no matter what industry and no matter what level of leader, a critical skill involves listening. And so that's a skill we all can benefit from doing well. And that's what today's webinar will be about. So I hope that you will take away some new or possibly just renew some of your own insights and action plans on listening. Let's see. So next slide, please. Here we go. Let's start with a poll. As Perry had given you some directions, let's see what your perspective is about, here's the question, about what % of your time do you think you spend listening to others? And it's a multiple choice, so you can text in 10%, 30%, 50, or 70, that's A, B, C, or D is what you would text in the letter. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, we've got some in about 33% at 30. Okay, here we go, 25, 25. So great. I think we can move on. That's awesome. It looks like you recognize that you spend a considerable amount of your time, your waking time at least, in listening. So what we found from the University of Missouri Extension wrote an interesting article indicating, what we all know is that listening is an integral part of our lives, both personal and professional, that it's actually the communication skill, looking at reading, writing, speaking, listening, that listening is the skill that most of us use most frequently. In fact, many of us spend 30 to 40% of our waking hours listening, which translates to about 5 to 6 hours per day. So that's a significant chunk of time. And the other interesting part of that is that most of us tend to be poor or at best inefficient listeners. So it's not a slam on anyone, it's just that it's very hard to be a really good listener. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then the noted business consultant Ram Charan had written that in some of his work in the 360-degree feedback realm, that at least 1 in 4 of corporate leaders had what he called actually a listening deficit. So that points to the definitely a gap and a need for us to pay some attention to this. Okay, so listening, this is our agenda for today, to look at listening as the complex set of processes that it is, how our ears and our brain are both involved, the fact that good listening tends to be active and not passive, and I'm sure that's not new news to you. We've been hearing about active listening for decades, and we'll just review some of that. Obviously, it's an essential skill, as we just saw on the previous slide, and the really good news is that it's a skill that actually can be mastered. And the caveat is you need to work at it. You need to train your brain to do this skill well. So let's now look at your current state. And this is going to be a set of questions I'm going to read. We're not doing an interactive poll here, but I'd like you to really pay attention. So please listen and answer these quietly to yourself. The answers would be often, sometimes, or rarely. So how often do you know or find yourself doing these things? How often do I give the appearance of listening when I'm actually not? Or assume that I know what the speaker is going to say, so I just stop listening? How often do I tune out people who say something I disagree with or I just don't want to hear? Or do I form a rebuttal in my head while the speaker is talking? How often do I daydream while the person is talking? Or do I think to myself, I assumed that he or she would know that? How often do I allow myself to be distracted by sights, sounds, devices, other thoughts, etc.? How often do I assume that I know what the speaker's intentions are, or that I know what his or her state of mind is? So thinking to yourself, how much did you answer often, sometimes, or rarely on those? You probably figured out that this slide describes behaviors that detract from good listening. These are very common, and most of us likely will have at least some of these things that we do either often or sometimes. And if you did say that, then that's an indication you have some room for improvement. Now here's another set of questions, sort of the flip side, but the same idea is to answer often, sometimes, or rarely to yourself. How often do I concentrate on what's being said, even if I'm not really that interested? Do I look directly at the person who's speaking? How often do I concentrate on the speaker's meaning? Or repeat in my own words what the speaker has just said? How often do I listen to the other person's viewpoint, even if it differs from mine? How often do I think about what do I want to accomplish with my communication? Or learn something from each person I meet, even if it's ever so slight? How often do I recognize that words mean different things to different people? Or do I know which words, phrases, or expressions might trigger my own hot buttons? How often do I think about what the other person might react to what I have to say? So ticking through your own answers there, you've probably gotten a sense and realized that these are the behaviors that actually enhance good listening. If you answered any of these with the response often or sometimes, then great, you are already on the right track to being a good listener. So now you've gotten a sense of your own current state with listening. And now let's take a look at how does it work, the process of listening. There we go. The two-way communication process. It looks a little bit messy, this diagram on the slide, and that's because communication can be messy. In this diagram, it shows two people, a sender and a receiver, and the process that happens between them during communication. So communication is basically a perceptual process. First, the sender encodes their intended meaning to create a spoken message, which then goes through the air and lands on the receiver's ear. And the receiver then has to decode the message to get the meaning. An important variable to be aware of is that thing in the middle, the yellow blurb called noise. Actually, it's not just in the middle, it's pervasive. It can literally be audible noise as well as any other distraction out there. Sights, smells, electronic devices, our own internal thoughts, the stuff that's around us all of the time. So effective communication depends on how we deal with the noise as well as having a shared understanding of the messages and the meanings that get both encoded and decoded. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit now, is those little red swirls you see, the encoding and decoding, and what that signifies. What that is, it represents layers of filters. And you've probably also heard of this, the lens through which we hear, or the filters that we hear through. That's what this means. And there's at least a few of them, and I'm going to talk about 5 of these filters that are with us most of the time. They're usually outside of our awareness. And these are the filters through which our messages either get encoded or decoded. And so they impact the interpretations that go on during communication. So first of all, there's our senses, our sight, our hearing. And you can, obviously, if you're with another person in a room, you're looking at their body language. So that's definitely part of the communication. And then hearing, what you actually hear with your ears. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next part. So your senses, and then there's the meanings. We all attribute meanings to what we see or hear. And that meaning is based on our own current reality, our past experiences, as well as our future expectations. And then we have feelings, and I show that as times two. We have the feelings about the meaning that we just attributed, and then we have feelings about the feelings. So for example, if you say something and I feel doubtful about what you said, that's my first feeling, is doubt. And then I might have this immediate flash that, ooh, it's not really okay to feel doubt. So I feel a little bit guilty about feeling doubtful about what you said. So there's this myriad of feelings going on. And then there's defenses, coping strategies, things like I might intellectualize, so I might immediately start going into analyzing why you just said what you said, or I might blame something, well, it's the weather, that's why you said it, or find some distraction. So all these ways that I might cope, and we all do these, that we, especially if we're uncomfortable in a communication sequence, that we might find our defenses popping up. And then finally, at the core level, there's the rules, the fundamental beliefs, assumptions, and values that we hold. So for example, one of my beliefs might be, well, it's not okay for me to show doubt to someone in your status. And so I might be wrestling with that in my own mind. All of these layers of filters are there, and they happen, this whole process of communication messages going through these happens in a split second. So you can see how the complexity of it can layer on really quickly. So the first step really is to just be aware that these exist. You don't have to change them, unless if you find they're not serving you well, then you might want to think about it a little bit. But otherwise, just be aware that the filters are there and that they play a role in communication. So recently, in the last several years, there have been a lot of research and articles written in the realm of, obviously, the neuroscience, the brain, and I certainly am no expert in this realm, but I did pick about 4 articles that I thought were quite interesting and relevant, really about the brain, its role, and then in a minute, what willpower has to do with it. So first of all, one article from the California Hearing Center talked fundamentally what's the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is the act of recognizing sound, such as being startled by a bang or turning your head at an unexpected noise. This is called signal-based processing. Listening, however, requires both hearing and knowledge. Listening is only accomplished through first hearing and then also understanding the message or sound, similar to what we just talked about in processing through the layers of filters, so the understanding. And then Seth Horowitz, a neuroscientist from Brown University, wrote an interesting article about where the brain comes into it, that hearing, first of all, hearing evolved as an auditory alarm system. Basically, we're hearing things all the time. Most of the time, we don't even notice it, but our brain is constantly scanning sounds in case if there might be something dangerous or possibly something wonderful nearby. So we're constantly scanning. And it's easy for most of us. And I would just make a footnote that there are, of course, there are people with hearing impairments. My sister is one of them. And so the good news is there's a lot of research and help out there for in that community as well. And some of these articles actually had to do with that, impaired hearing. But for most of us, hearing is relatively easy. But listening, according to Dr. Horowitz, is really hard, especially when there's so many potential distractions out there. Our brain is just waiting to detect these distractions, possible dangers or possibly something wonderful. And so to really listen, we have to tune out these distractions. And we have to know what the patterns of our environment are. So he says the difference between hearing and the sense of hearing and the skill of listening is capital letters, attention. And there's different types of attention. There's the attending to a sudden loud noise that makes us startled or jump, and that's stimulus-directed attention. And then there's the attention when we really focus our hearing and the signals and the messages. And that type of attention goes through other areas of the brain, which is doing more computation. And that lets us focus on what we're hearing so that we can even better tune out the other distractions. So luckily, we can train ourselves to do this better. Therefore, we can train our brain. Another researcher, Dr. Ronenberg, a psychologist at the Swedish University, has started I think he's the founder of a science called cognitive hearing science. It's relatively new. And what he's doing is examining the way our minds actually process auditory signals sent to the brain, factoring in the complexity of what we're listening to, the listening conditions, like if it's really noisy out around us, and that he has recent models of language understanding, the complex interactions of the signal, in addition to our working memory capacity, the executive functions of our brain, as well as our long-term memory. All of these things working together in short order within our brain, which he calls, he and other researchers call a top-down process using working memory and attention. And then there's the bottom-up processes that rely on our actual ears, our inner ear, how we detect phonological and linguistic processing. So depending on, it all sounds very scientific, and again, I know I'm not an expert, but the articles are very interesting. So depending on the listening task and how adverse the listening conditions are, these bottom-up and top-down processes interact at different levels within our auditory system at all the time. So there's a lot of complexity going on while we're listening and hearing. Something to be aware of, and it emphasizes why it's so hard. The last article was from Korn Ferry, which many of you probably know is the renowned human resources and executive development consulting firm. And they've studied, they have a website called the Korn Ferry Institute, and there was an interesting article about the science of listening, where they talked about Harvard Medical School as well as Edinburgh University. And a researcher in Edinburgh talked about how our listening brain is wired similar to the other person, that the brain is wired to perform triage all on a moment-to-moment basis, that it's evolved because our brain actually has finite capacity. And so our brain is trying really hard to be efficient. And so the paradox in this is that active, good listening is actually counter to what our natural brain wants to do. Our natural brain wants to evaluate input all the time, predict outcomes, make judgments, and perform triage in any single moment. And it doesn't want to tune things out, and it doesn't want to pay close attention. So we have to really, it's like swimming upstream. We have to help our brain master these natural tendencies, because now, especially more than ever, we live in a world where these distractions are just pervasive. When we all want to be multitasking, which some of you might be doing right now, and I hope not, and we're information overloaded. We've got all these things going on in our world. And so it's really helpful for us to realize we're not flawed. We're just really, really trying to help our brain overcome some of these natural tendencies so that we can decode and integrate and associate and screen these messages. And there's a tools document that Perry will have available on the website after this. I'll just note that some of these articles are referenced, and so you're welcome to go look them up and have fun reading those yourselves. So now I'm going to switch gears here and go into the actual practical tactics and actions that we can use to improve our listening. So the first tactic is really simply to become aware of the fact that there are these barriers out there. They're natural, and we can overcome them. And we've categorized these into listening barriers and responding barriers, given that the two-way communication process involves both listening as well as responding. The listening barriers, about 4 of them that I'm highlighting, are self-bias, which is basically listening to my own frame of reference, my own attitudes, or my own beliefs. The second one is my preconceived expectations, basically hearing what I expect to hear or being selective in what I hear. Power influence is listening depending on how much power or status I think the other person has. And then finally, distractions. We've talked about a lot. There's my internal distractions, which I can be thinking to myself, gee, that your shirt isn't buttoned the right way, and so now I'm really focused on that rather than what you're saying, or listening to tone of voice rather than what you're saying. And then there's environmental distractions, such as phone calls, emails, other people, temperature, sight, smells, etc., squirrels, whatever. All kinds of distractions for listening. And then there's the responding barriers. There's about 3 general types of these. So this is when we've heard a message and now we're actually responding to the message. There's judging, which could sound like being overly critical or diagnosing, analyzing the reasons why you think someone is saying what they're saying, or telling them, oh, good job, but maybe not really meaning it. So there's sort of a judging kind of quality to what we say. And then there's giving solutions. I know many of us, myself included, have always been rewarded for being good problem solvers. And so giving solutions really comes naturally to a lot of us. So somebody will say something and we immediately think of a solution for them. We give them advice. We might give them a command. We might preach a little bit, tell them what they should do, what they should think or feel. Or we might ask them a lot of leading questions like, well, have you thought about this? Or did you think about doing that? So really it's in the vein of, here, let me solve your problem for you before I ask. So let me just take a time out and say, your solutions might be a very, very good idea. But the key is to let the speaker really explain their thought process. And then at the right moment, you can say, hey, I've got some ideas about that. Would you like to hear a possible solution I'm thinking of? I mean, just that little step of basically asking permission to offer your solution. And that can go a long way towards then the listener not feeling like you're just preaching at them, but that you're collaborating. So rather than jump right into the solution, ask permission, and then you might find a really good dialogue evolving from that. And then the last responding barrier is like avoidance, avoiding their concerns, either diverting the topic to a completely different topic. They might have said something that's bothering them, but now you're talking about, hey, did you see how much snow we got yesterday? And you're completely diverting it. Or you go into some kind of logical, over-intellectualizing argument where you reassure them, like, there, don't worry about it, everything's going to be okay. So those are all forms of avoiding a person's concerns, which again feels really dismissive or discounting to the person and does not lend itself well to good communication. So knowing that those barriers are there, and again, it's just part of our natural process, I'm going to ask you a question. Let's see if this will come up here. I've got a poll question to ask you, if it'll cooperate with me. Here we go. So I'm going to read you a scenario. So you're going to need to listen. And then I'd like you to answer my question with A, B, C, or D after I read the scenario. So here it is. You're at a networking event and it's social hour. You're talking with a person who doesn't know you that well, and the person says, hey, what have you been up to these days? And so you start passionately describing a current project that you've been working on. You're so excited to share. And then after a minute or two, you begin to notice that the other person's eyes start glancing across the room. Not once, not twice, but several times. Yet they seem to pretend to pay attention to what you're saying. And we've all probably experienced this. So what type of listening barrier do you think is happening in this scenario? Is it self-bias, A, or is it B, expectations, preconceived expectations? Is it C, power, or D, distractions? Go ahead. I see someone's already typed in their answer. Give it another couple seconds. Okay, we've got a little bit of variation here. Okay, good. So 75% say distractions, 25% say preconceived expectations. Well, the obvious answer is yes, obviously that other person was definitely distracted. And I'm not sure if I typed that, if that's spelled right, but that's okay. So definitely some distractions from the averted eyes looking across the rooms. And I would say there also could be these other barriers at play. So whoever said expectations, you might be absolutely right. That could be going on, that the person really wanted to hear something and wasn't hearing what they were expecting, and so they started tuning you out and looking around the room. There could also have been some self-bias or even some power influence. So those barriers are really intertwined, but most obviously that person was distracted. Good. So let's look at a different scenario. So you're at the same networking event, and now you're sitting with a good and trusted friend from one of your past work groups. You were so happy to reconnect with one another. Your friend starts telling you about a very difficult and challenging life situation going on. And as you're listening, which you are doing a good job of listening, you start to recall your own challenges, maybe somewhat similar to your friends. And so then you immediately realize what helped you during that time that you were having challenges. And so instantly you start listing the steps that your friend can or should take to address the problem they've encountered. What type of responding barrier is happening in that scenario? Judging, A, giving solutions, B, or C, avoiding concerns? Okay, it looks like right away we've got 100% at giving solutions. Ding, 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 you're right. You have hit the nail on the head there. You've definitely started giving solutions. You may have also had some internal judging going on where you might have been analyzing. And then in the context of giving solutions, the other person that's talking might also have the feeling that you're avoiding their concerns. So, but obviously you started giving solutions. And I tell you what, I'm so guilty of that myself. And it's a lifelong effort for me to work on not doing that so quickly. But again, like I said before, asking the person after a while, like, would you like to hear some ideas that I have? That's also a skill we learn in coaching. Okay, very good. Thank you for answering those. So what is the path to better listening? I'm going to speed it up here a little bit. There are 3 types of listening, which you probably already know about these. There's marginal or non-listening, which we also call passive listening. Basically, you're not listening, or you're half listening, or listening in spurts. Then there's the evaluative listening, where you're really kind of partially listening. You hear what the person's saying, but you're not making a big effort on understanding their full meaning or their intent. And then there's active listening. And I've got the check mark in that box because what we're trying to do is build that skill. Let me just stop and say, not every single situation in your life is always going to require active listening. There will be times when you can do marginal or evaluative, and it'll be just fine. But the point is, you need to be able, at a moment's notice, to switch into gear to be a really effective active listener when the situation warrants it. And if you haven't practiced it, you won't be able to do that as well. So that's why we want you, or hope that you want to yourself to build these muscles to be a good active listener. So active listening requires some specific skills: attending, following, and reflecting. And I'm going to be giving you some techniques in all of these. Attending is basically showing interest in the speaker and how you really just need to be genuine. If you're sincere and genuine, the speaker will know that, and genuinely interested. And then using following, those are the skills where you let them know that you're following what they're saying. And then reflecting is basically reflecting back that you understand what they're saying. And I'll give you some techniques in a minute. So what is active listening? What isn't it? And what does it require? It is a way to increase the likelihood that you're going to actually hear what the speaker says. It will increase your level of involvement and effort. It can actually make you tired. What it is not is what we've already said: giving solutions, making an evaluation, interjecting your opinion, or detracting with logic or analysis, or even some leading questions, which might be like, well, have you thought about this? So that's really not a genuine question. What you might say is, how might you think about that, or something. That's an open-ended question, and that it reflects better listening. So what active listening requires, it does require your undivided attention. It requires that you have genuine concern for what the speaker is saying, and that you can suspend your own thoughts or suspend your own needs for a moment to listen. And it requires a desire for you to try to understand the feelings. And if you don't, you should check it out. Like, so how is that making you feel? You can ask that to the speaker. It also requires that you know your own feelings. So remember when I said, we've got these layers of filters. You need to be aware of your own. And, there are things that people will say that I know are going to trigger me, that I don't like certain words or phrases. And it's not their fault that I don't like it. So I just have to realize that of myself and not let that detract from my ability to be a good listener. So here's some useful techniques back to the things we talked about. I mentioned in what active listening is. The tools and methods handout that Harry, not the handout, but the tool that Harry has posted has several of these listed. These are just a few of them. So you can download that and look at it on your own. But some of the ones that I like, the first one, and what it sounds like, it's silence. And it sounds like this. Maybe painful for those of us who are extroverts. When you're talking with someone, you need to let there be silence. And if you've ever gone through the course called Fierce Conversations, one of their key principles says, let silence do the heavy lifting. If you allow the pause and don't need to jump in right away, a lot of times the person speaking, they're processing in their own mind, they might start filling in the blanks. And it might be very, very helpful. There's also acceptance, which basically the technique is accepting what they say. And let me highlight on this, acceptance does not equal agreement. I can accept what you have to say, but it doesn't mean I have to agree with you, and vice versa. And that can be a little challenging as well, especially in important relationships. So that's a key technique. And then the general leads, what that means is basically just asking the person to go on and say more. You're not leading them down the path you want them to be in, but just asking them to expound more. And then there's restating and summarizing and clarifying. I'm lumping those together. Those are just words and phrases you can say like, what I heard you say is XYZ, did I get that right? Tell me more about what you're talking about. Could you please describe it more? And then seeking clarification is to be honest and say, hey, I'm not sure that I'm following what you're saying. Would you please say it again or tell me what is the main point? What's the main point in all of this? In a genuine way, certainly not being sarcastic. And then making an observation is observing how you're sensing the speaker. Like, wow, I really see your face light up when you talk about that topic. It looks like you've got a lot of energy around that. Am I right about that? And let's see what else. Focusing, that's another key skill where you're helping the person if they seem to be all over the place. Again, you can say, I'm hearing all these different things that you're saying. Where do you think the most importance lies right now? Something like that. So you can actually help be part of the conversation, but in a more uplifting and encouraging way while you're actively listening. And hopefully you're learning something from it too. So some guidelines to take away from this for effective listening. First of all, find areas of interest. Even if it's a boring topic, you can ask yourself, what can I get or learn from what's being talked about? Focus on the content and what the person is saying. Hold your fire, meaning don't send out your solution or your judgment. Wait until you know when the right time is to interact, and just don't jump in too soon. Listen for the main ideas and concepts. Listen for what's not being said. What's the main idea and that the speaker is trying to provide? And be flexible. You won't have to use the same exact listening style with every person. Some will need you to be more silent. Some might need you to be more actively, verbally involved. So be able to be flexible. And then number 6, work at it. Practice, practice, practice. Just like building any muscle. Listening requires that you practice it. And then reflect on it after you're done listening. Say, how did I do on that listening episode? Of course, 7, resist the distractions. That will always be there. 8, exercise your mind. Keep your mind sharp. Whatever it is that you do to keep your intellectual stimulus going, do it. Whether it's reading or listening to great music or going out for a good jog, keep your mind exercised. Keep your mind open. That's back to being flexible and listening for ideas and concepts, realizing you won't agree with everything that you hear, but you can accept that that's where the speaker's coming from. And then also, number 10, remembering that our thinking speed is quite fast. And especially with slow speakers, your mind is going 100 miles an hour somewhere else. You've got to harness that in, just like a bucking stallion. You've got to harness that and keep it under control when the time is appropriate to do that. Okay, so before I give you your action plan assignment, I would like you to just take a breath and think of a time. Just think to yourself when you were in a conversation with somebody else and that person was really listening. They were really, really listening to you. Hopefully you've all had that experience. You just knew that they were listening from the way that the interaction was going. And I'm wanting you to think about that and remember it and visualize it. What was that person doing, the person that was listening to you? What were they doing while you knew they were listening? And then also importantly, what were they not doing? Okay, I bet they weren't looking at their watch or checking their emails. And then what did you feel during that encounter? I know when I did this for myself, first of all, I felt heard, I felt valued, and it also improved, it helped the relationship. It like fed the relationship in a positive way. Like I always remember that person who was a good listener in a very positive light. So that's the value of effective and good listening. So now what I'd like you to do is, on your own, there is actually a segment in the tools document that's on the website for you to think about what else do you want to learn from this, and the reading you might want to do, what will you do to practice, and then eventually how will you master it. And remember, you have to practice, practice, practice to become a master. And something you might even consider is what you might want to stop doing. So here's a poll for you. And the question is, this is a word wall where you can write any word or phrase that you want within reason, please. What will be the first actions that you will take right away, and I mean right away, like today, to start training your brain to be a better listener? So go ahead and just type in some words or short phrases and what you will do right away. Okay, I'm going to challenge you. You're going to practice what? What will you specifically practice? Okay. Okay. Great. So we've got being aware of my own listening barriers. So great, awareness is really important. We've got print the list of poor listening attributes so that I can be more mindful. Practice, practice, silence. I love that. Practice more silence. Silence is hard. It really is. And I say that as I'm sitting on this webinar, just talking, yakking away. Try to acknowledge what the other person is saying before commenting. Very good. All of these are awesome. Meditate so I can slow down thinking. Yes, that's a wonderful way to work on training your brain is through meditation and mindfulness, something I'm trying to work on myself. So these are fantastic. Practice not offering solutions. Aha. So many of us have been rewarded all these years for being such great solution providers. And we're good at it. Remember, you can offer it after you ask permission, assuming they say yes. Learn how to demonstrate active listening. So that's a really interesting one. So one thing you could do, I'll just throw this out, assuming you're okay with me doing it, is you could even say to the person you're talking with, hey, I'm trying to be a better listener. And what we just did in the last 5 minutes, I attempted to use, you can be honest, I attempted to use some of these new methods. How did I do? What was that like for you? Did it seem like I was being a better listener for you? Now, I know for some people that might be hokey, and you might not do that for everyone, but it's certainly okay to be honest. I think if I were to type one in, I would say interrupt less. Sometimes I get really impatient and I just want to jump in, and I hear myself interrupting and I think, oh, did it again. Should have had a V8. So these are great. Perry, I hope we can take a lock on this, because I really love all these answers. And I
Yes, we can.
You. Okay, great. So in summary, we've got just about 10 minutes left here. So most of us, in summary, so thank you again, everybody, for offering those good ideas. Most of us are inefficient listeners. We're not bad people. We're just inefficient listeners because of the way our brain has evolved. So we need to master it. So in today, we've looked at the two-way communication process. We've looked at hearing versus listening and our brain's involvement. We've examined some listening types, techniques, and guidelines, and we've definitely acknowledged that active listening is hard work, and it can be very rewarding when we master it. So some parting thoughts from our beloved Stephen Covey. You've probably heard this one before: seek first to understand, then be understood. Scott Peck, which I think he wrote The Road Less Traveled, you cannot truly listen to someone and do anything else at the same time. And I bet he wrote that before there were smartphones. And Winston Churchill, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And that is all she said. And I've got to say thank you. Sometimes there's a delay here in the slides. So thank you very much. And we do have time for Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bonnie, for all the work you put into delivering this content today. So I am going to work on unmuting everyone so that we can, take questions. So I'm working on that here. You also have a chat function on your computer, so you can type in a chat. Let's see, I'm trying to get to. Let's see. Go to the group. Just go through and unmute everyone. Hopefully. You have a question. I believe everybody is unmuted at this point.
And so, Perry, according to my clock, we've still got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Is that right?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, great.
So any questions?
Any stories anybody would like to share about good listening experiences or not good ones?
This is Lucinda. I'll ask a question. I find that it's very hard at times to be present in the conversation enough to, like, you're so focused on maybe what the person's saying or what they're trying to communicate to you that at times it is hard to, and what I mean by present, I mean have the presence of mind to be thinking, okay, I should be silent now, or I should be redirecting, or I should be acknowledging, or I should, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to really be as conscious about the skills of listening while you're actually listening. So maybe some tips on that.
Yeah, I love that. That's definitely fraught with some paradox, isn't it? Because really, you're distracted by your own thoughts about what you're telling yourself you should be doing, and I can totally understand. I think my tips on that would be, don't worry about. Certainly you can read through these tips and guidelines a few times and just sort of start to internalize it another time. But while you're actually in the moment, and I love that you use the word be present, the tip is just be present and sort of let your intuition be your guide in that moment. And if it seems like you're really understanding and you know you're understanding, you can just make eye contact or over the phone, just let someone know, yeah, I'm really hearing what you're saying. So, and it doesn't, the label of the technique really is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So I think you're already doing it by trying to be present. That's really the key.
Yeah, Bonnie, if I could add, the one thing that I tend to do when I'm in a session, sort of like a performance review or discussion with a peer or some sort of project, is to have note paper, because one of the challenges I have is my forgetfulness. And so sometimes I'm jumping into a conversation to try not to forget a point I want to make. So when I go into a session, it's having paper or pencil somewhere close by, so that as something pops into my head that might start me to being distracted, I can jot it down, so that I'm comfortable that I can go back to that point when there's the appropriate time, and then stay focused on what's being said versus trying to remember that, or prepare my response. So having some sort of note paper or something where I could jot down something is a technique that I use. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Yeah, very good. It's a real challenge. And so I think your awareness to it is really the very first step, and just continue and then try to just calm down that internal dialogue that you're having, and just really just be able to be present.
Other questions? All right, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, there is a section on our website that has recorded webinars. This one will be placed on that website along with the handouts. I have everyone's email, so I'm going to email you some tools and resources that Bonnie created, and then references to some of the articles. So you'll get that in an email, and it will also be up on the website. And look forward for the next webinar. We have a series webinars being developed all the time. We have 3 or 4 members who are content experts that we're in the process of producing webinar topics. If you have a webinar topic, or you're a subject matter expert and you're interested in working with us to produce webinar, we'd love to hear from you. And with that, we're going to say have a great afternoon and happy listening.
Thank you, everyone.